It's a story about how do we deal with living in a tsunami zone here in Vancouver. I started about 3 years old. I started my musical training as a composer. My teacher at the time was in his late 90s.
Oh, wow.
He was a student of Helmholtz in the 1880s.
Wow.
In the 60s. Isn't that insane?
That's amazing.
He was my mother's theory teacher, too. So I went on to study composition, and it just so happens that I did my undergraduate degree at Simon Fraser, and at the time I couldn't even program my microwave, and just as a requirement I had to study electronic music, and I just kept taking the courses, and I did become pretty decent at it. And when I went to grad school at CalArts, I was basically a computer composer and wrote interactive music for instruments and customized electronics that I would build myself. Then I moved back to Canada in the 90s to take care of my mother, who needed around the clock care. And this went on for nearly 10 years. And at that time, I didn't write anything. And so I came back after nearly 10 years to composing. If I'm going to come back, I want to deal in a genre that I dreamed about as a little girl. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I could get an orchestra performance and an opera and maybe write a concerto, and if I can get some performances in Europe, that would be fabulous. And so that's how it started. So when I came back to composing in 2008, the first thing I wrote was an orchestra piece. And then I kept writing orchestra pieces, and they all got performed, and so I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of musical relationship between my first composing career as an electronic composer, but I gotta admit that 10-year break really helped me to work on a dream composing career for the second time around, or nearly 10 years later.
How did you arrive on the topic of debris for this cantata?
So there was a sequel of sorts before, a mini opera called 1,000 White Paper Cranes for Japan. It's about a 7-year-old boy in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, who saw the disaster unfold on CNN. He wanted to do something, so he decided he is going to fold 1,000 origami cranes, go sell it in his neighborhood. And I was so impressed by that story that I thought I had to tell the story in opera. Then I found out about Pete Clarkson, who is a park ranger in charge of the cleanup of the debris that is still washing up from the disaster. It's been 6 years. So what he's done is taken the material and turned them into a memorial in Tofino called Swept Away. And there was a documentary film made by John Bolton, and I saw the film and I thought, wow, this would be a great opera and a sequel to the story. Until the 1,000 Crane Opera, I resisted writing opera. I've been a composer for decades, but I was raised by my mother, who was a soprano. And so I resisted writing opera mainly because opera was her thing. And just before the tsunami, she passed away, and I thought, well, maybe it's time to write an opera. The Thousand Cranes opera was really hard for me because that opera is very emotional. So this time, for the postmodern camerata, I thought, well, since there's a choir and an orchestra, rather than trying to write a mini opera, what I wanted to write is a staged cantata in the tradition of J.S. Bach. So what I see that is different at an emotional level between opera and cantata is the emotional detachment. You don't have a big aria moment where people are crying their eyes out. It's a different kind of emotional experience. It's a different kind of spiritual experience. What I'd like to do is tell a Canadian story about how we looked at this disaster and what we can do as individuals and as a community.